All right, it's been a hot minute since I talked last. Yeah, last time we spoke was mid last week with API stuff, but now I get to handle the very last bit, and consequently also the most important bit. So we've now reached the end of the road of the actual content juicy part of WebLab. I mean, we'll have how to win WebLab next, but now we've gone through every step of making a web app. You guys have actually made something beautiful and you want to show it off to the world. So how do we go about doing that? So first we should define what deployment really is. And so as we said just a second ago, we want our web app to be viewable by the whole wide world. And right now, how we've been doing things is we've been running our server.js with the npm run start command, and that has been running things locally through localhost 3000. But what we want is something a little more beautiful, and such that we want something they can type in their browser bar, access anywhere in the world, any time of day, and have the wonderful functionality of their site. So we want some mapping. Instead of localhost, we want our website.com. So now we get to enter the beautiful, painful world of deployment. I totally redeployed the WebLab website like 50 times this morning. It was beautiful. And so we'll see how these deployment errors can come about. We'll go through deploying a few times. So for basic WebLab deployments, we're going to use Heroku because it is free. It is pretty cheap. You can't really beat free. And it works pretty well for our purposes. So all of your project names will follow the format your app name.herokuapp.com. So you notice we had catbook2021.herokuapp.com. It'll follow that format. I don't remember if it was in homework 1 or not, but if you don't already, I would make a Heroku account. I forget if that was actually part of our homework or not. So what we'll do is we'll sign into our Heroku account, and you'll notice on the home page of Heroku at the top right, we have this button labeled new. And so what we can do is we can go and we can create a new app. And so you can define your app name, and then you can hit create app. And so what I have here is I have the WebLab Heroku, and so for the purposes of this, I'm going to make a dummy app. So let's make catbook dummy. And it'll say catbook dummy is available. Yeah, make sure. So the name you type in here will be is what is prepended before .herokuapp.com. So while you can make as many of these free dynos as you like, I don't think they have a particular limit. The name that you put here will be what they type in the bar. So it doesn't matter what you have it named in your actual code. This will be what is navigable. So it's kind of important in that regard. And so we'll hit create app, and we'll be greeted with this lovely page with a whole bunch of different stuff. We have some different options for connecting our app to our actual code. And so the way we want to do things is we'll go underneath the deploy tab, and we're going to hit connect with GitHub. And for the purposes of this lecture, if you follow along with me, you can just deploy. If you already have your skeleton copied over and pasted, you can go ahead and as we go, follow along with not catbook React and do things with your own personal repo. I sort of recommend that. And so for me, I'm going to copy over catbook react and deploy it. And so I'm going to hit search, and here at the top I have catbook react. So I'm going to connect that, and it will essentially, it'll connect that. That is indeed the right repo we want. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here to manual deploy, and I'm going to deploy master real quick. And so it'll go ahead and try and resolve all of the dependencies. It essentially just automatically will clone it, npm install, and try and run npm start. Now I want you to place bets on whether or not that's going to work out, because technically we've actually deployed. We hit the deploy button. Was the deploy button successful? Place bets. I want to see hands. How many think truly successful first time? All right, I think there's 5 of you. Yeah, no, I'm sure at least 4 of you were meaning. Yeah, so as you might have seen, it does say at the bottom your app was successfully deployed. But if you view the logs, the deployment stuff, when you hit view, it'll try and take you to the page. Now, because you just made a free dyno, it'll take like a hot minute for the server to actually like boot up and start serving you the files. So it might be like 3 or 4 minutes before it actually gets up and goes. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that whenever that page eventually loads in about 3 minutes or so, it'll say application error for catbookdummy.herokuapp.com. And let's figure out. So the page will tell us to look at our Heroku logs. And so let's figure out how we can look at our Heroku logs. So how we go about looking at our Heroku logs, we go back to that home page, and at the top right, we'll have more and view logs. So it's slowly making progress. Yay, okay, so we got the application error that we technically didn't want, but it's what we expected. So yeah, if we go back to the top here and we go down to view logs, we notice something. Let's refresh this page and see if I can get it to appear. Oh, I should probably refresh the logs page. We had one timeout. I don't know if the logs are updating in real time or not, but so yeah, initially it starts out running on port 3000. Oh, there we go. Something crashed. Let's see why it crashed. If it'll actually show it up. Yeah, so here we go. So our error that we got here, right before it swapped from starting to crash, our error that we got here says web process failed to bind to port within 60 seconds of launch. So let's figure out what that could possibly mean. So it initially tries to run on port 3000, which works perfectly fine for our lovely local host systems in our lovely controlled environment where we have access to all thousands of our ports. But in Heroku's case, their port management is a lot more wild. Some of you have already encountered a lot of port issues, like Apple apparently decided in the Monterey Mac OS that AirPlay just takes port 5000. Don't know why they decided that, but so in Heroku's case, to avoid these port issues, they do dynamic ports. So you can't just assign one hard-coded port in your application in a deployment on some cloud server like Heroku. So we need to figure out a way to assign ports dynamically. We want Heroku to tell us what port to run on. And so Heroku adds this port to this magical thing called the env, or the environment. And so we can pull that. Now we can still use port 3000 when we're running things locally in our local dev environment, but in a deployment, we're going to want to look at the env. And so we can do that by doing this lovely OR statement. But let's figure out what env is. So we've talked quite a lot about the segmentation of web apps, the segmentation of the tech stack. We've talked about front end, we've talked about different server stuff. We have databases, we have authentication, but there's another thing that feeds into the server, the environment that it runs on. So your server does know things about the machine that it runs on. It knows generally what operating system, and there's plenty of environment variables and things that it knows about. So these environment variables are global across everything running through our server, and so only the things on the server can access these global variables. And so because Heroku passes this information along and our server is running on Heroku, there's something we can utilize to grab this information. We can also use it to hide sensitive information from front-end clients. So you might remember the Mongo Atlas SRV and also the session secret for auth stuff. So those are things you don't want to just go around publicly sharing on the internet, of course. You don't want people messing with your databases or messing with your auth. So these types of things are hidden within the environment of the server that is running your server. So yeah, you don't want to put that information directly in your code as we have been doing it locally in Catbook for the past little while. Instead, we're going to want to introduce this concept of a .env file. So on the outermost folder of our projects, we can introduce a .env file just simply by hitting that new file button, naming it .env, and VS Code will recognize that .env is something special and put this little gear icon to the left of it. And additionally, in your .getignore, just so you don't end up actually pushing your .env file to GitHub, because your repos are public, just so you don't end up pushing sensitive information to GitHub, it would be absolutely amazing if you, in your .getignore, which is, as you see in the screenshot, 2 files below, you can open that up and literally type in .env on the next line, and this will make such that when you do git add dot if you're unsafe, or git add, if you do git add, it's not going to automatically add it. It will ignore it, git ignore. And so what we want to do with this .env file is we're going to throw in our secrets, things that only we want to know, only things that run on this machine should know. And so we're going to throw in our Atlas SRV in all caps. We're going to have a variable name equals some string. So here we're only using 2 environment variables, but some of your projects may have way more, especially once you start implementing more APIs. You'll have more API client keys and things like that. That varies wildly from API to API. So you'll have to define those things in your .env, and note that because these .envs are not pushed to GitHub, each individual member of your team has to have their own .env. now the contents of these .envs could be the same. You could all use the same Mongo SRV string, but you each have to have your own .env file. So after you clone, that's something you should communicate with your team members to make sure you each have. And so to actually utilize the .env file, so there's a package that we can utilize called .env, literally spelled out. And so to implement that, all we have to do is in a terminal, we'll use npm install.env, and then we'll add a simple line to the top of server.js. I'll show you how that looks in code in just a second. But we'll add the line require.env and its config. And then to access variable names from your .env file, all you have to use is process.env the variable name that you use in your .env. So instead of having code that looks like this, where we've blatantly put in code some secret stuff that we don't want, we're going to replace them with their .env equivalents. So if we define them in the .env as all capitals atlas_srv, then in your code, you'll refer to it as process.env.atlas_srv in all caps there. And for a similar reason, we'll do the same thing with port at the bottom of server.js. And so, yes, if you make those changes, you'll see that here in server.js, I've added the require.env.config. I've gone through and I have replaced the Atlas SRV. I've replaced the session secret, and I have changed the port to be either dynamic if it's provided or hard-coded if it is not provided. So with that done, so if you're working in your own personal repo and you've just now made these changes, you can add those files and commit them and push them, and now we can redeploy once more. So I'm going to go back to the deploy tab. Now for my purposes, I'm going to use a branch I've made, the deploy branch of Cablook React. And I'm going to hit deploy. Oh, additionally, one thing I forgot to mention. One thing that if you've already cloned skeleton and set up skeleton, because of a weird bug in node 17, one thing you might have to do is you'll have to change this line in the package.json. It's under the engines object here. You'll have to change it from being greater than or equal to node 16 and just set it equal to 16.x. This will ensure that Heroku installs only version 16 of node and not version 17. This is only important if you've already set up skeleton. But our thing has deployed once more successfully. All right, so let's place bets. Was the second time the charm? All right, I want to see hands again. Who thinks that the second deployment was the successful deployment? Now that we've actually set up proper ports and everything. We've got one hand, a brave soul. A brave soul, okay. All right, so everybody, what do you think did break? What is wrong with this deployment? What is broken? Heroku doesn't have any of that .env information? Well, you're exactly on the money. So yeah, Heroku, as I said, that .env is unique to each of our host machines. So we didn't push this .env. You shouldn't have pushed this .env. So Heroku doesn't have it, even though we hit that deploy button and it copied over our new updates to our branch. Heroku doesn't have this .in. And we can't just open like a file explorer on Heroku servers and go in and add a .env. So let's figure out how we can go and actually add environment variables to Heroku. So Heroku's way of calling them environment variables is they are config variables. Same thing, just different name, more or less. So how we go about adding .env to Heroku is there's the settings tab, and there's reveal config vars, and there's a section for key value pairs. So what we can do, so yeah, if you try and go to ta-da, it breaks because it doesn't have a session secret at the moment. So we can go in here and we can reveal config vars. I actually don't have the SRV string on hand at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab it. So I'm going to set atlas underscore SRV, and we do not have to use quotation marks here in Heroku. So I've pasted in the SRV here. And lastly, we have session underscore secret, and that was this. All right, so we've got the two config variables set up here. So let's do one last deploy real quick of the deploy branch. So just, yeah, a quick run through in text. .env is the local file and config vars are Heroku feature, but they serve pretty much the exact same purpose. And after you set your config vars, remember to redeploy. So it's third time the charm. How many times are we going to redeploy this? All right, hands one last time. How many of you think the third deployment is the successful deployment? You've got one. We've got two. We've got three, four. Is that 5 and 6? You did this lecture last year. You should know. I didn't change the slides at all. All right. So yes and no. Third time was not the charm. So if we actually go back here, like the page will like actually load and be sort of usable. I think we can actually, yeah, so it'll tell us to log in and like we can actually grab the messages and things. But if we try and use login here, womp womp. So if you remember back when we did auth setup, there was this section here in like slide 7. Where we set the allowed JavaScript URIs. And we really only set one there. We set localhost 5000 as an allowed JavaScript URI. But if you'll notice, this isn't localhost 5000 anymore. So we have to have this as a allowed JavaScript URI. So this is the link back to the auth slides, but the place where we're going to want to go now to actually add our URI is console.developers.google.com. And there you can navigate to the previous credentials that you've made before. I'm not going to do that because I think that includes some stuff I can't show. But there's a credential section. And you can go ahead and edit the ones you've previously made, and you can add new URIs. So I already have the tab open. So let's go ahead and just for dummy reasons, go ahead and add this to Kavik 2020 for a second. It doesn't like the slash. All right, cool. All right, so that's saved to our OAuth. So we've hit save now, and hopefully Google updates this stuff relatively quickly. Let's see how quickly it updates things. All right, so we're gonna refresh our page. No, we don't have to redeploy here. So technically, all the people that raised their hands on third deployment with the charm were correct because we're not redeploying again. Yay! So now we can we can technically log into what it thinks is Kavik 2020 because I was too lazy to make another OAuth token. And some things might once again be broken. What is broken? Is it just not letting me log in? Cool. Well, at least the slides did say things might still be broken. So a short recap. The process of deployment from having your web app finished to actually getting it accessible to the rest of the world. So you can link your web app to Heroku through GitHub, which you should have been pushing all of your code to GitHub to begin with. You can make a .env file locally and then add that to your git ignore so you don't push it globally. Remember, it contains stuff that your GitHub should not know about. You want to make your ports dynamic, so Heroku can dynamically provide your port. You want to put any sensitive data. So this mostly just means API keys. I don't think many of you will have too many other examples of sensitive data that should be thrown in the .env, at least not for web lab's sake. And you access them with env variable name. You put them as config vars in Heroku for actual deployment. You don't need quotes. And you need to let your Google Auth know that you're trying to do things from a new site and that it is indeed you. And then lastly, you can do the good old deploy button. And so when all is said and done, hopefully things actually work out properly. Apparently, this copy of this branch is broken, but oh well. So yeah, that is pretty much basically how deployment goes.